so annoying, right? You are trying to just take a break from all the startups things, and then you got this annoying where it's just coming and throwing money at you to build the thing. That is so annoying. I feel for you, man. Were you planning on going to some kind of remote island and resetting a little bit?
So the original plan was I bought an old house, right? Really old house for my family, close to Berlin, Germany. And the original plan was to rebuild this house with my own hands for 2 years and take a 2 years break. That didn't happen, right? So I went home to my wife saying, hey, you know what? We need contractors. I don't have time for that house. Luckily, my wife knows me since almost 2 decades now. So she understood, okay, the decision is made and the decision is made. But I can tell you, she wasn't super excited about it first, but understood, okay, this is the way to go. So instead of taking 2 years off, rebuild the house, I took 2 weeks off to find contractors and start the next startup.
So in the end it worked out, but I can imagine that wasn't an easy conversation. You promise your wife to build a house with your own hands, and then you come and say, you know what, sorry honey, not this time.
Sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do.
Today I am super happy to talk to Hannes Lenke. Did I get that right? Hannes is the CEO and co-founder at Checkly, and turns out common friend. He's at his second startup, previously exited testobject.com, and now he's shifting towards the DevOps, and he's trying to take the market with him. Hannes, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. Great to be here, Miko. Thanks for the invitation.
So we've got some lessons lined up from doing that kind of stuff, and I think a lot of the audience is, at least at the very least, thinking, okay, I should probably do a startup too. So I'm hoping we can talk a little bit about that, but first of all, tell us a little bit more about Checkly. What is Checkly and why should it exist?
Checkly's mission is actually to help engineers to own the reliability and performance of their apps, of their APIs and apps, pretty much from pull request to postmortem, right? Which is a long process, as we all know. It's pretty much everything that you might want to do after committing code to really ensure that your app is tested well and running on production, right? We develop tools and a software as a service that helps you to own exactly this piece of your software development process.
And what does that actually look in practice? What are tools to own things like?
It's actually pretty simple, right? So if you think about Checkly on a very high level, then we're a monitoring platform with a workflow attached, right? Just these two things. Workflow that we call monitoring as code, and the monitoring tool is a tool that enables you to constantly ping your application, constantly test your application on staging and in production, right? We help our customers to create automated test scripts and run them as tests like you used to, and then run them continuously from 21 different data center locations worldwide to understand how your users are actually experiencing your application. And if there's something wrong in the process for your users, then we're going to alert you and going to enable you to act, maybe wake up, etc., and communicate that there's such a problem to your actual end users, right? So we use lots of open technologies to achieve that. Checkly is Playwright based, which is an open source technology and framework developed by Microsoft, which enables you in the end to automate browsers and automate APIs. And you can imagine that the customer at Checkly, let's say LinkedIn.com is a customer of ours, that they're automatically logging into LinkedIn every second, trying to understand if their login works, and then checking if their LinkedIn feed works, etc. And if that doesn't work anymore, then they get alerted from Checkly or from their dashboards pretty much. And we believe in open technologies, which means you can integrate Checkly into all the tools that you have, right? So Grafana, etc., etc. You know, it's a tool made for developers, so very open.
So let me see if I got this right. So basically, in the older days, we'll have something to do the unit tests, right? And then we'd have something to run the unit tests, maybe in CI. People would say things like Jenkins, and they would run things. And then they would maybe have a script that runs an end-to-end here and there, and that would hopefully pick something up. And then they would introduce things to see if their APIs are up and maybe ping them or do some kind of health check and add another tool to all of that. And then we evolved and we added metrics and we added things like Prometheus and Grafana and all of that. So you're saying you're basically trying to get it all under one roof. Is that roughly right? Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's roughly right. And we developed Checkly because of a change that we have seen in the market, or a change that is ongoing, frankly, since 2006. That's called DevOps, and we all know DevOps. And what DevOps actually means is that there are teams that were traditionally siloed, operations, QA, developers, are now working together in one cross-functional team, which in the end means they're interested in a service or an application that performs well on production. And to achieve that, traditionally, there were testers, quality assurance engineers writing end-to-end tests, the end-to-end tests that you have just described. And engineers were writing unit tests, but also end-to-end tests. And then there was a group called operations that, after a new application landed on production, started to write their own monitors with different languages and different approaches in solutions that are really not optimized for developers, where you need to maybe click automation test scripts together instead of writing them as code. And we believe that this all ties together and that these different functions are now sitting in a team together, so they need to have the one tool that supports them all. And we believe that this tool, and our customers also believe that this tool is based as code. And we call this monitoring as code. So we enable you pretty much to write the automated test scripts that you had traditionally, since Selenium was there since more than a decade in the code repository, to use them as tests. In our case, it's not Selenium, it's Playwright, which is much more modern. And then also as monitors later on to really understand how your app is doing in production. And more than 1,000 customers, actually paying customers, believe so as well, and are using Checkly to do exactly that. So pretty much to unite testing with monitoring. This is what we do in the end.
So I'm obviously biased because now I love the space, the reliability bit of it, and I guess shifting left used to be a thing people said. I don't think they do that anymore all that much. But yeah, I'm biased towards that stuff. But at the same time, I also know that it's currently tricky to develop developer experience. It's harder to get funding for that unless you stick AI on this to get the money. How has been the experience of developing a dev level tool in the current climate been?
We so far had a great experience, right? So we were able to raise money throughout the last years. So overall, we secured more than $30 million for Checkly and are a Series B now. Obviously, developing any kind of tool, from my point of view, requires you to have success in between. So for a seed round, you can probably raise money with a nice idea, right? With a pitch deck and having a prototype developed that one or two users might use. And then the further you go in the fundraise process, the more real data you need to have, right? And real data means maybe active users, or in the end, also paying customers and customers paying you real money, right? So revenue generated. These are the metrics potential investors would look at when you raise money. And this is for sure something that convinced our investors. Next to, I still believe that shift left is happening, even though not everyone is talking about that term anymore, because to some extent it happened already. And obviously everyone is talking about AI nowadays. Other terms are getting used more.
Yeah, 100%. So if we were to take a snapshot right now, so you mentioned the paying customers. You've got a team of, about 50 employees at the moment, fully remote. How long have you been working on this project?
Oh, we started Checkly in 2020, right? So there was a Checkly, it was a side project before, and in 2020, Tim and I, so my co-founder, decided to take Checkly to a real business and work full-time on it. So it's 5 years since we really started.
So what was the signal? Or what made you think, okay, this is going great, let's make it a lifestyle and start a company around it.
There were multiple things happening, right? You already said in the introduction, I sold a business before to a company called Source Labs. My first startup was called Test Object. And what we did is we bought hundreds and thousands of mobile devices and put them in data centers. And in the end, allowed testers, test automation engineers from larger organizations to test their mobile apps on remote devices. Also automatically and manually back then. And then we sold the business to a company called Source Labs. And there I was responsible for Europe. And being responsible for a region in a larger startup means in the end, you got to work with customers, right? And ideally you bring more customers on board. So we did so. So I worked with a lot of customers across Europe, across the world. And the more I talked to them, the more I've seen conversation shifting from a tool that's only needed for testers towards a tool that's needed for a cross-functional DevOps team. So I had a clear signal that the market is shifting and that test automation tools are used for reliability use cases and are used in cross-functional teams, right? So that was the first signal. And then at the same time, by coincidence, Tim, my co-founder, who's actually Dutch, lived 2 kilometers away from me in Berlin, and I found him just Googling who's building a solution that might help us as such a use case. And I dropped him a line saying, hey, Tim, you don't know me, I don't know you. We should talk about your side project here because I think it's great. And then we started talking for months. And my initial plan was actually not to found the next startup right away. Since we recognized over all these conversations that there's quite an overlap in vision. And also, and this is really important, there was users that were really excited about this product. Even though it was a side project, users that were willing to pay money for it, right? And back then we had users paying us $7 per month, sometimes $25 per month. And for us, this was the best thing that, happened, right? Even though the solution didn't generate thousands of US dollars every month, but was a clear early signal. There were customers with real use cases that were willing to pay for this early solution. You asked me why we made the decision. In the end, it was influenced by people that we talked to and the market shift that we believed is happening. And then also customers already paying money for it, right? So it was a really easy decision to double down on it.
Jesus, so annoying, right? You are trying to just take a break from all the startups things, and then you got this annoying whereas just coming and throwing money at you to build the thing. That is so annoying. I feel for you, man. Were you planning on going to some kind of remote island and resetting a little bit?
To be honest with you, Miko, the original plan was I bought an old house, right? Really old house for my family, close to Berlin, Germany. And the original plan was to rebuild this house with my own hands for 2 years and then take a 2 years break. That didn't happen, right? So I went home to my wife saying, hey, you know what? We need contractors, right? So I don't have time for that house. Luckily, my wife knows me since almost 2 decades now. So she understood, okay, the decision is made. But I can tell you, she wasn't super excited about it first, but understood, okay, this is the way to go. So instead of taking 2 years off, rebuild the house, I took 2 weeks off to find contractors and start the next startup. Yeah.
So in the end, it worked out. But I can imagine that wasn't an easy conversation. You promise your wife to build a house with your own hands, and then you come and say, you know what? Sorry, honey, not this time.
Sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do. Yeah.
Tricky, exactly. Okay, so let's try to extract some lessons, because I do a lot of these events. Last week we did SRE Day, and invariably, every time I speak to people in tech, there's always a layer of what I like to call entrepreneurs who would like to build something. They've got all these ideas and stuff, but never really took the jump to actually make it something real for them. They might have some side projects that might be considered, maybe similar to what you used to have this as a side project. There's some interest in it. So let's try to extract some lessons from the path that you took. There's to gauge whether this is a good idea and the right fit for them, because we obviously are always bombarded with these success stories and it always sounds so easy, but in practice, life is life. So what lessons do you have for other people who might be considering starting your own thing?
Yeah. Before we talk about lessons, a startup is never always easy, right? We hear all these success stories, and most of these success stories are journeys, right? And obviously, not everyone likes the word journey, but for me, it's still the perfect term to describe what we're doing, right? So it's a long-term commitment that you might want to take. I think the most important thing here is, as I'm also talking to a lot of potential future entrepreneurs all day long, is at some point you got to make a decision to get started and to commit yourself investing your time into something, right? I see a lot of people coming up with ideas and then developing prototypes and not really getting started. But I believe you can test an idea nowadays very easily. So maybe what convinces you in the end is having the first paying customer, having a customer paying you $10 per month, and then really, committing yourself maybe to invest 2 hours per day, and ultimately maybe quit your job and really work on this thing full time.
That's an interesting one, because typically what you hear on the internet is always, oh, yeah, I need to go full throttle, all in, jump into it, don't give yourself a plan B. I'm always thinking, sitting there, why don't you verify this, get some customers that pay you $10, and then that's an indication that you can sell that. Still not a guarantee it's going to get big, but it gives you a signal.
Yes, I believe you can't really force success. So you gotta have an idea that gets people excited. And Miko, as you said, I'm a strong believer in verifying that. And if we have a full-time job, then we're working 40 hours per week, which pretty much means that we have quite some time, probably in the morning and in the evening, to really, let's say, go full in during your free time and really investing time to spin the service up and make noise, marketing to get people in. It's also very important lesson is always, you gotta find people and you gotta talk about what you're doing and do marketing, maybe even do sales. Just because you have a great application, most of the time, in 99% of the time, will not get you there, will not get you to the first paying customer. I don't know where your potential users might be. Maybe they're DevOps users, etc. So you might want to go to meetups. You might want to hang out in Slack communities, etc., and then find your first users. And then once you have the first users, you might be able to convince yourself or others that this is the right thing to do. But mostly, as a startup founder, you're the one believing it. And others might not believe it, might not believe it early. And this is in the nature of things. It's not, if it is such an obvious solution to build and to work on, then, everyone would do that. And that's normal, right? So you got to find the early adopters that want to use your solution and then go full in. And going full in, I believe, should happen at some point. And this means that you're dedicated, right? I'm always saying showing up every day is very important. And there are certainly lots of things that help me to show up every day, right? First of all, I have a family that helps me to think about other things, decompress from time to time, because as a startup founder, your brain is naturally wired to think about your business all day long. There's sport that I'm trying to do frequently, 5 days per week, to disconnect in the end from the crazy life that you have, even having a very early startup. But in the end, it's a long-term commitment. And I'm a firm believer that you shouldn't start your startup if you think about it short term. It will always take longer, and it will take likely years if you're successful, right? If you hear these success stories that someone founded a startup and crossed 100 million in ARR within, nowadays with AI, weeks, etc., that can happen, but usually it's not happening, right? So usually it will take you years to be successful, and your plan should be to invest years into this. Maybe you want to find co-founders early on. Maybe not, right? You don't need to, right? There are lots of people that think, okay, you need to have co-founders. I think for me, it was always easier to have co-founders, people that you can call if you have a bad day or bad hour, And sometimes as a startup founder, you have a customer calling you, hey, we're not going to renew the contract. And an hour later, your largest customer is calling you saying, hey, we're going to double the contract. So sometimes you have bad minutes and then really good minutes right after. And it's like a roller coaster. And it's easier for me if I can share this with others, right? And really talk about it.
All right, so that's already 2 lessons, right? Lesson number 1 was test the waters before you jump head first. I guess we all heard it in primary school, the swimming classes, but good to hear it again. And the second one is it always takes longer than you expected. It's a marathon rather than a sprint, basically. And there was a little corollary that is basically, don't worry about that one kid that worked on something for 6 months and sold it for millions of dollars. That's an outlier. That's not how it usually works. It takes years. Did I extract it right?
That's 100% right.
There you go. All right, so 2.5, basically 3 lessons right away there. What about your remote working experience? Because to address the elephant in the room, I think there is perception of people working from home don't work on Fridays, basically, and all of that. So for a team that relies on that from the ground up, I get there are the obvious advantages, no cost of the office, all of that. But what's your advice on making it work, basically?
You know what? I don't know if being remote is cheaper or less expensive in the end as a company. Let's talk about what we do to succeed as a remote company. And there are clear advantages to being remote, but also disadvantages. And just because this is right for Checkly nowadays, if I found the next startup in 10 years from now or whatever, then I might make the decision to have an on-site team. We're remote, right? And we're 50 employees. We have strong roots in Europe with a team, an increasingly larger team in the US. And actually, I'm going to move to New York this summer with my family because we have lots of customers there and it's for multiple reasons to move there. But let's talk about being remote. So first of all, I'm strongly believe in transparency within an organization. So I try to share lots of data, and it starts with product data, usage data, but goes to revenue data and how much cash do we have in the bank, etc. And sharing all this with my team very transparently, right? So we have lots of dashboards, etc., and everyone got access, and we are talking about it every Monday. So we have a stand up every Monday and on talking with the whole team, pretty much kicking the week off every Monday afternoon, European time, in the morning, US time. And then we are trying to be very intentional about the tools that we're using, right? So in our case, it's likely not a surprise to anyone in the startup scene right now. It's Slack and Notion. Well, we have guidelines around that, how to use these tools, how to communicate with tools. We're reduced emails to almost zero, except some emails which are triggering internal processes where we won't have the documentation around it, which comes with emails. But pretty much everything happens on Slack and Notion. And we also believe in transparency, right? Which means most of the communication is happening in public channels by purpose, right? We have public channels for almost everything. And for example, our marketing team got a channel and the other teams can join this channel, are not obliged to join. If you're interested and an interested engineer want to understand, okay, what is the marketing team working on? How are they preparing the next product launch? Then you're able to join that team channel and just read, right? The same with meetings, right? So you can just join other teams' meetings, etc. That's one piece where we try to help the team stay connected. And the other very important piece here is from time to time you should actually see each other. And we're doing offsites or retreats, how we call them, twice per year, right? So we fly the whole company into a certain region, right? So Greece, for example, or several months ago, we flew my team to Spain and spent some time in the north of Barcelona together for a week. And during that time, we do planning sessions, alignment sessions, but also have 50% of our time for just conversations, right? And activities and free time, etc. That's very important for the team to connect to each other and really spend time with each other. And at least twice per year, I think that's key to a remote team that really thrives. The other piece is it's Zoom, etc. You gotta repeat yourself, right? So it was a learning for me, right? So sometimes you're, as a leader, you think, hey, I said that once, I said that twice. Why didn't everyone understand, etc.? Or why didn't everyone act or hear it? Watch yourself, right? If you look at yourself, how you're using Zoom, sometimes you're disconnected, right? So even if, someone is talking, so it might make sense that you as a leader, you just repeat what you said in another meeting, right? Reiterate, etc. I think that's true also for non-remote companies, but even more for remote companies, right? So where you're really not seeing yourself at breakfast or something like that, or at the coffee machine, and talk about the day before, etc.
The challenge there with using Slack for almost all of it is that it can be tricky to find. And like you said, I think repeating the same information, especially like the important bits over and over, helps with that. But the discoverability is still a little tricky, isn't it? If you want to find a conversation, it's all in natural language. There's no title, there's no thread. Sure, there's Slack threads, but there's no like in email. It is a little bit easier, I think. So did you find that a challenge as well? Or did you find that wasn't really a problem?
Yeah, the Slack search is not the best search, for sure not. So what we try to do is we're asking our teams to document decisions on Notion or in tickets, right? So we're using shortcut in linear for ticketing systems, and really their engineering decisions, these should sit there. If you talk about customers, right, we are a CRM HubSpot in this case, and are asking the teams to document their decisions there. I think Slack is great to have a conversation, right? But then really, if you want to make decisions, then you should document it somewhere and maybe have it sitting on Notion and then share it with others, because others might want to review it. Actually, same is true for Zoom conversations, right? It's great to have a conversation. Maybe as we are a remote company, maybe that conversations happens early in the morning, European time, and then half of the team is on the East Coast, so they're not even awake. So you better have a recording of that meeting with a transcript, etc., that is shared somewhere. And so that others are able to catch up on these kind of things.
For sure. That's a good segue to the next question I was going to ask you. So you've seen both the European and now the US, I guess, startup scene. Yeah. What are some of the main differences that you noticed and that might have been painful? The things I'm thinking about are probably stuff like funding or talent pool, or what you just said, the difference in hours and how to deal with that. Do you have insights that others can use on that?
Yeah. So maybe to share what we did early on. We decided to go full in on Checkly 2020, as I said. And then Checkly was actually had an entity registered in the Netherlands because my co-founder was Dutch. He naturally registered an entity there. But during the first round that we raised, we made the decision to flip Checkly into an Inc., right? So a relevant, registered, incorporated entity, right? For multiple reasons. But before we talk about these kind of reasons, let's talk about the first round that we have raised. My first startup was based in Berlin, Germany, and I had very local investors for this first startup, which was great, right? So these investors have spoken my language, they understood my first customers, etc. But even for my first startup, it became very clear we're expanding internationally, right? And we need someone on board, maybe in our board, investors that really understand having an international business. And I didn't have that luxury with my first investors early on. So it came with a lot of advantages to have local German investors, but also disadvantages. So for my second startup, I decided to try to find a partner that is thinking international, right? Is thinking about international customers, about expanding this product into multiple markets, etc., and finding customers also in the US, etc. And we onboarded or agreed with Excel to become our investor. Excel is one of the top investment firms in the world, but they have an office in the UK, which was perfect for us, right? So us as a European team, They have a partner and office in the UK, while Excels is very, very much thinking about global businesses, etc. So we onboarded them. And the advantage here is that if you have such an investor on board first minute, they will ask the kind of questions that you need to succeed globally, from my point of view. Then I think this is what a developer tool should be, right? So a developer tool is not meant to serve just customers, let's say, in Germany or Poland, so a developer tool is pretty much meant to, or at least Checkly is meant to be used globally, right? By users in the US, by users in Japan, Germany, etc. So all around the world, right? So that's one piece. The other piece, flipping the company comes with quite some advantages compared to having a German entity, pretty much. So if you want to raise funds in Germany, then there's a paper process involved. Usually you have to go to a notary and then they read out the contracts aloud, and afterward you're able to sign a contract, right? So it's a very long process to, even if you agreed on a contract, to get it signed in the end, right? While
the infamous German paperwork.
Yes, and this process is still the process that we use till today. While if you have an incorporated business in Delaware, you can just send DocuSigns, right, and get this signed. And I'm always saying I'm the least patient German on the planet, and I'm really not patient enough to go to a notary and listen 5 hours to contract, and later on then being allowed to sign it and not being allowed to sign it before. So that's really painful for me. That's one piece. The other piece is obviously things like stock options pools for your employees, etc. These are processes that are common in the US since decades. So there are tools that help you to set it up. There are lawyers that know exactly what you want to achieve because they used to work with startups, used to work with even developer tool startups, etc. Right? If we talk about talent, I'm not sure if it makes a huge difference early, because what you're looking for early is this really maybe young employees that want to support your mission, etc. And I don't know if it makes a difference to be incorporated in the US or in Europe in the end.
I guess for a remote team, probably a little bit less, but employing tech talent is still considerably more expensive in the US than it is in Europe.
So it's more expensive for sure. The advantage of being able to employ people worldwide, I think this is what it is in the end, is that you are able to find potential employees worldwide and be intentional sometimes about where to hire. I think for developers, our strategy is still to have the teams in a similar time zone. So it's a GMT ±3. We're able to hire people in Turkey and maybe also in Argentina because it's not too far away. But most of our engineers and product managers are sitting in Europe.
But you're gonna move to -5.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Now we're talking about this piece, right? So while for employees that are maybe helping you with marketing or sales, you might want to have employees on the ground, right? Because your customers might want to talk to sales people on the ground, right? And you might want to meet them, right? And in the end, why am I moving? Because I'm flying quite a lot currently, right? So I'm every other week in the US to meet customers because luckily COVID is over. So we're back to being able to meet each other. And I very much enjoy to meet people, and also customers really enjoy if you show up in their offices, which in the end means you might want to have sales and support on the ground in the US, right? In this case, being remote is making this easier. But let's face it, if you would be remote, you would make the decision to open offices there, right? So all of a sudden you have 2 hubs where you have people, etc., right?
Yeah. So would you say that was a major advantage to what a remote team?
I think the major advantage is that you're able to onboard and hire the people that you might know, but moved away from the city where you're living in. So we hired quite some employees coming from our extended network. And the advantage here is that we are able to onboard product managers that we talked to 3 years ago but that unfortunately moved to Spain or whatever easily and really work together with them and don't need to ask everyone to relocate to a certain city, to Berlin or whatever.
Unfortunately, maybe for you, but probably fortunately for them.
Yeah.
A lot of people moved out during COVID, right? They built houses with yards and then the priority shifted.
Unfortunately for me as a leader, for sure. And really for them, it's great. Even I moved right out of Berlin, right? So I'm in the suburbs of Berlin now. And
yeah, it's crazy. If you take any big city, if you move an hour away, you can get so much more for your money in terms of houses and space, and the air is just a little bit cleaner and everything. So that's a major advantage. All right, that makes sense to me. What else do you advise other people to do or against?
I wouldn't see founding a startup as I think I said it once, right, as a short-term thing. So it's not a lifestyle thing, right? So it's not a startup to live startup life and attend events and get free drinks. That's not what a startup is. A startup is real work, and often more work than a day job, right? And I believe that's at least what a startup for me is. Obviously, there might be other models that enable founders to work even less, but I really believe the reality is that most founders are working more. In the end, you should do it if it excites you, if it's almost your hobby, right? If someone asks me, hey, what are your hobbies, etc., it's first of all, it's this thing, what I'm doing every day, right? That is really exciting, right? So being able to be in Seattle, San Francisco last week, work with one of the largest companies out there and see them using your tool, see how they're hiring teams to use your tool. That's really exciting. It's even more exciting I grew up in Eastern Germany, in a small town in Eastern Germany, and being able to do this every day, that's cool. Ideally, this is somewhat your hobby from my point of view, and you really enjoy doing that, which doesn't mean that you need to do it 24 hours per day. So that's probably the number one lesson I had here. And then also I said that already, but show up every day and be intentional about showing up, I guess, is also one important piece.
Perfect. I think that's a perfect note to end this episode. Hannes Lenke. Again, everybody, the CEO and co-founder at Checkly. It's checklyhq.com, right? For anybody who wants to check it out. Where do people follow you? Are you on LinkedIn? Are you on X?
I am on X. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm using LinkedIn nowadays, a lot compared to X. So if you want to read more about me and from me, it's LinkedIn. If you want to check out Checkly, we have a free trial. We have a plan that starts with $80 per month right now. But you can also use us as hobby user and be successful there.
That's good. Thanks a lot, Hannes. I'll see you next time.
Thank you.